quiz one will look similar to this review. For the first one, write the correct inequality sign between the following two numbers. So we've got -9 and -7. -9 is less than -7, since it would lie further to the left on the number line. So you put a less than sign. Or if you wanted to, you also could have included a less than or equal to sign, and that would have been true here as well, because -9 is less than a -7. For number 2, perform the following operations using the order of operations. So remember, we've got PEMDAS, so parentheses, exponents, multiplication, division from left to right, addition and subtraction from left to right. So in this case, we'd want to do the -8 to the second power first. So for that, we'd have a -64 because the -8 is not in its own separate parentheses. So you'd keep that negative sign. Just the 8 is being squared in this case. Plus, and then if you wanted to, you could in the same step do the 9 divided by 9, since in this case the division comes before multiplication because you go from left to right whenever you're trying to decide whether you do multiplication or division first. So if you do 9 divided by 9 for this step here, then we would get 1. So we'd have a +1, and then we'll have to do the times by the 6, and then we'll still have the +12 at the end. We'll keep our parentheses signs here, and then we could go through and use the denominator values here as well to evaluate those. So we'd have a 9 plus, and then we'd start with the parentheses on the bottom. So we'd have -3 plus a -4 is another way of writing that, or you can think of it as -3 minus the 4. So either way, you would end up with -7 there. Next, we can continue in the numerator, because remember, whenever you have a fraction bar, you do the numerator and denominator separately. So in the numerator here, we'd have -64 still, and then plus, and then we can do this 1 times 6 next. So we'd have the -64 plus 6 from doing the 1 times 6, because multiplication always comes before addition or subtraction. And then we'd still have our +12 at the end there. And then the denominator we do separately. So we could do the 9 plus the -7. So in that case, we would end up with a 2. Next, keep working in the parentheses. So we're running out of room here, so we'll go to the next side here. So -64 plus 6, we would get a -58. And remember, you can use your calculator to help you break up some of these steps as well, but make sure that you are showing your work. Don't try and plug it all in at once. You will not get full credit without showing some work. And then we'd still have the +12. We can drop those parentheses now since we've done everything inside the parentheses in the numerator. And then we still have the 2 in the denominator. Next, we can add together the 2 terms in the numerator, -58 plus 12. So we get a -46. And then the last step here will be to divide. Do the -46 divided by 2. Just remember that fraction bar is another way of writing a division sign. So in this case, your final answer here would be -23 once you've finished doing that simplification of dividing that. Remember, anytime you have a fraction, you want to make sure to simplify that fraction as far as it will go. The next one, identify the property demonstrated in the following statement and explain why. So in this case, you'll notice we have 3 times 4 equals 4 times 3. The only difference there is the order in which these are written. So that is what's called the commutative property. And once again, the reason why is because only the order is switched. Everything else is the same, and you would get the same answer on both sides, which is the commutative property. Next one, solve this equation for x. So whenever we're solving this type of equation, you want to make sure to get a common denominator first. So in this case, if we have 7 and 5 as our denominators to begin with, our common denominator would be 35 by doing the 7 times 5. So here we'd want to multiply everything in each of those fractions all by 35. So I'm just going to write it as times by 35 this way. And then what you could do is do the 35 divided by 7 for that fraction on the left-hand side there. So in this case, if we do 35 divided by 7 to simplify that first fraction on the left-hand side, we would get 5. So we'll have 5 times, and then you'd still have to multiply the numerator by that value. So you'd have 30, or the 3x that we had to start out with there, plus 5. And then once we get to the next step, we'll be distributing whatever we had in the numerators to whatever value we got once we simplified the 35 divided by the 7 there. And then do the same sort of thing for each of those fractions. For the next one, we'd have the 35 divided by 5 for that next fraction. So 35 divided by 5, we get 7, times by the numerator that we had there is 2x plus 4. Or if you prefer for these, you could also go through and multiply the top and the bottom of the fractions and eliminate that denominator in the next step if you prefer, if you're used to that. There's definitely multiple ways that you can solve any of these equations. This is just one way to approach it. So then for the last fraction here, 35 divided by 7, we get 5 once again. And then times its numerator, the negative x plus 8. And then, like I said, we want to go through and distribute next. So if we do the 5 times the 3x plus 5, everything in that parentheses, remember to distribute, we're multiplying the 5 times the 3x, also the 5 times the 5. So we'd have 15x plus 25 for this step, and then equals, and then we'll go through and do the same sort of steps for the other side. So the 7 times the 2x and the 7 times the 4. So we'd have 14x, and then multiply the 7 times the 4. So we get a plus 28 there. Make sure to be careful with your signs. Keep the sign correct. This would be positive once again because it was a positive times a positive. But for the next one, we have 5 times a negative x. So in this case, we would have, you can either write it as plus a negative x, or in this case, I'm going to switch this up here, and we'll write it as a minus 5x, because that becomes negative once we do the positive times the negative there. And then do the 5 times the 8, so we'd get 40 in this case. And then the next step is go through and solve this like any other algebra problem. You would combine like terms. So the left-hand side, there's no like terms there. There's no terms that have an x, multiple x's, or multiple constants. Remember, your constants are those numbers that do not have the x's, like the 25 on the left side. But on the right side, we do have like terms here, so I'm going to underline those. So we've got our 14x has a like term of the negative 5x, and then we also have this 28 has the like term of 40. Since those are on the same sides of the equation, so you keep the same signs. You only change signs once you move it to the opposite side of the equation. So if we do 14x plus the negative 5x, or do it as 14x minus 5x, both of those are stating the same thing, you'd have a 9x there. Multiple ways of expressing these. And then if we do the 28 plus the 40, then you'd have 68 for that part. And now we have combined all of our like terms there. So your next step for this one would be to move the x's together to one side and your constants to the other side of the equation there. So one way to do this would be to subtract both sides by 9x would be one way to start to get the x's both on the left-hand side of the equation. So if we do that, then we would have 6x on the left-hand side plus the 25 equals 60 from the other side of the equation still is left over there. The 9x minus the 9x on the right hand side canceled each other out. So if it helps, you can always make a note of that these would cancel out because those would zero out. 9x minus a 9x equals 0. 0 plus anything keeps that number the same on the right hand side as the 68. And then we can subtract 25 from both sides of the equation to finish getting that x part by itself. Once again, the 25 minus 25, you can think of those as canceling each other out, or they zero out because 25 minus 25 gives you 0. So then we'd have 6x equals, and then do the 68 minus the 25, so we get 43. And then the last step, anytime whenever you're solving an equation, remember, is to finish getting just x by itself. So in this case, we would need to divide both sides by 6. So that way we have x instead of a 6x. Because 6 divided by 6 would give you a 1. A 1 times x gives you just x. Because 1 times anything is itself. So that's why we're left with just an x on the left-hand side now. And then check, once again, anytime you have a fraction, see if you can simplify that. In this case, 43 and 6 have no common factors. There's nothing you can reduce for that fraction. So your final answer in this case would be x equals 43 over 6. And in a lot of your scientific calculators, you may have a function for going through and simplifying those fractions. So if you have that, you can definitely ask, or if you're not sure, definitely ask to see if you do. And then here, once again, it was 43 over 6 for your final answer there. I know it's a little difficult to see now that I boxed that in, but that is 43 over 6. And then for the last one, if you have 28 music downloads, that costs $32. How much does it cost for 18 music downloads? So here we'd want to set up a proportion. One way to do so is to do the number of music downloads divided by the cost. And then you can do a similar thing on the other side of the equation. Remember, proportions, you always set the two fractions equal to each other. So since we had music downloads on the numerator of the fraction on the left side, the number of music downloads would have to go in the numerator on the right side as well. And then we don't know the cost for the right hand side, so we could label that as x. And then what you could do is you could go through and cross multiply here. So that means doing the 32 times the 18 and the 28 times the x. So if we do 28 times x, that would just give us a 28x. And then on the right hand side, if we do 32 times 18, we get 576. And then once again, to finish getting x by itself, we want to divide both sides by that number in front of that x, so that way we end up with just a 1x, not 28x. To simplify that. So if we were going to simplify this fraction now, we could divide both the top and the bottom there, the numerator and the denominator, by 4 to simplify that fraction to get the answer in exact form. That is simplified. Again, the 28 and the 28 would cancel, or in other words, 28 divided by 28 is 1. 1 times that x gives us just x. So here then, if we simplify that, we have 144. And then it would be over 7. It would be the exact form of writing this. Or because this is dealing with money, it'd be helpful to have an approximation here. So we'll write then that it's approximately equal to $20.57. If we go through and divide that out, that is approximately what it would be. Once again, not exact, because we are rounding that here. And whenever you're dealing with money, you round to the hundredths place, out 2 decimal places for your dollars and your cents there. And then like normal, make sure if you do have other questions, make sure to ask.